Good day, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. Before we get started, just to let you know, everyone's microphone and video is muted. We will unmute it at the end of the presentation for the Q&A portion, but at any point in time, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your window to ask us questions. We will respond to them either by typing back a response to you or answering them during the Q&A session at the end verbally. My name is Bijan Kimirgar. I am the Associate Executive Director for Research here at CCC, and I'm joined by my colleague Maria Drobniak, who's our Senior Research Associate for Data Resources. Thank you all for being here, and welcome to Maria. Today we have an overview of our data resources at CCC, and to do a walkthrough of the online database, which Maria is going to provide you the details of the different interactive tools we have on our site. And the goal for today is really for everyone on this call to come away with an understanding of both our print and digital data resources that we have. The database that we manage online is data.cccnewyork.org. If you'd like to pull it up, but again, Maria will be going over this in detail. And just to give you some background on Citizens Committee for Children, for those of you who may be wanting to know more, there's really three pillars of work that make up our portfolio. The first is what you'll be hearing about today, which is our research and data analysis. The second pillar is really what the research and data analysis is in the service of, which is policy advocacy to ensure that legislation at the city and the state level is in the service of children and families. And we do this in a number of different ways. One is by meeting with elected officials, but then also our policy advocacy is buffered and supported by our civic engagement work, which is the third pillar of CCC's portfolio. Here's really what encompasses our public education courses, such as our community leadership course, which is currently underway, our youth community leadership course, and Youth Action. These are our public education programs, but we also have several public education campaigns, including our upcoming work on the census, which in an upcoming webinar next week, you'll be able to hear more about from our colleagues, Carlos Rosales and Sofia Halkitis. In terms of our data resources specifically, our work encompasses publications, including our Keeping Track of New York City's Children biennial report, which covers hundreds of indicators on child and family well-being. And also we take 18 of those indicators and put them into what we call a community risk ranking. This is actually an annual report that looks at where risks concentrate in specific areas of the city. And this coming year, we'll be releasing a new edition of the community risk ranking. And in the coming year, 2020, we'll be releasing a new edition of the Keeping Track of New York City's Children data book. We also have our online database, which will be going into depth. So I will go to the next data resource, which is another print publication, but I wanted to spend a little bit more time here explaining what this is. We do what we call community-based assessments, which utilizes publicly available data that we analyze, and also administrative data on assets that exist in communities across the city. And we speak with community members in parts of the city where we're doing our projects to ensure that their voices are elevated, both the concerns that they see as most pressing that are facing children and families in a particular neighborhood or community of New York City. And we also speak with service providers about the concerns that they see, considering that many service providers in the area, people who are part of different educational, healthcare, or in general family serving providers, that they can also share information about what are the pressing needs. And we also talk to them about what are their recommendations. And so all of this information, the needs assessment based on public data, the asset mapping, and the community engagement components come together in these reports. And so far we've published 3 reports, one on Brownfield, Brooklyn, one on Northern Manhattan, one on the North Shore of Staten Island, and imminently we'll be releasing a report on Elmhurst, Corona, Queens. Today, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into our online database, data.cccnewyork.org, to give you all the different information that you might need to know about how to navigate the site. And again, at any point in the presentation, you should feel free to ask us questions via the Q&A at the bottom of your window. We may send back a little text response, or we may save that till the end in the live answer portion. But thank you again for being here, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Maria.
Thanks, Bijan. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to give you the first walk through the Data CCC New York via webinar. As you know, we typically do workshops, we host the trainings here at the CCC. So this is a new avenue for us. So what you see now on the screen is Data CCC New York homepage. And I will just bring your attention to the 4 tools that we host on Keeping Track Online, which is Explore Data, and I will say it is an online version, an extension of our Keeping Track data book, which we produced since 1993. So as Bijan mentioned, there are more than 100 indicators, and I will dive deeper into this tool first. Second tab is Rank Communities by Risk, which is essentially an online version of the risk ranking. Every year when we produce a new risk ranking publication, we also update the data on a risk ranking on online tool. The third tab is Mapped Community Resources. This section was actually born out of our first community-based assessment in Brownsville, where we really felt the need of bringing in assets into the story about risks, but also understanding strengths in the community. And the fourth tab is called Create Location Profiles, and it really allows users to compile several indicators for one particular location. I'm scrolling down on the page, and you can see some of the facts on this screen, and you can also connect and go back to the CCC main website. And at the bottom of the page, you have a couple of updates. We are looking for a data intern, so I'm just going to make a plug here, and you will see, you can see some other updates down there as well. So when I go to Explore Data, there is a landing page where you can see that we grouped these hundreds of indicators into 8 domains. If I click this button, all the domains collapse, expand. And you will see that in different domain groups, we have different, I would say, subcategories. Like under housing, we have housing conditions, homelessness. If I open education, you'll see that we have a section on student characteristics, school characteristics, and performance matrices. All of our data is coming from, as you might know, from publicly available data sources. One of them is US Census American Community Survey, but also a variety of city administrative data sources, such as DMHMH, Department of Education, Administration for Children's Services. In many cases, data is available already on New York City Open Data or agencies' websites or other portals. And in some cases, we are really maintaining these close relationships with the agencies to get the data and make it available on a website. So you probably are familiar, or if not, you can explore all of these sections in detail. I will bring your attention here to this functionality, which says first select the location type. You don't really have to select this first, but it really tells you that all of the data we have is available by community. Majority of the data is available by community districts. There are 59 community districts in a city, and they are associated also with the community boards. You'll see that some of the indicators are available by UHF districts, mainly indicators in a health domain. Also, we have data available by school districts, which is education data. So you can start from here, and I will jump into one of the indicators to walk you through the tools on Explore Data. So just the first glance, we have a map tool, which I will go into detail. You can also view data in a table format. And you can compare communities by using the bar chart functionality. So going back to the map tool, in this first top section, you'll see that on the Explore landing page, you could see the indicator child population, but here actually you see additional characteristics we had for that indicator. They vary from one indicator to another, but they can have different age groups or race ethnicities. In this case, we have child population in different household types. So you can navigate that section here. And again, bringing back to location types, but by default, the map has community districts. You can also select and view the data by borough, or for the city as a whole, and for some other indicators, you will have different geographies. We are currently working on bringing in new geographies on keeping track online, such as police precincts and zip codes. Over here, you will see that you can view the data in different data type formats, like as a number or percent. For some indicators, you will have a dollar value if it is median income. And the really very important part of the database is that we are maintaining the continuity of data and like historical perspectives. So for many indicators, data go back to 2009 or 2012, depending on availability. And I will scroll down and I will switch the map back to community district. So for each map, you will have a legend, and you also have a trend line for New York City where you can hover over and see actual data points. If you select one community, you will see the name for that community district, data that is associated, and the rank compared to other 59 community districts. And over here, if you see now, you have a trend line for Flushing, for the community itself, and information for all of the breakdowns since I'm selected on household type. We see how many children live in households with married couples, with single parents, and other. And then below, underneath, you have the same data for New York City as a whole as a comparison. This part of the page is really important, and it lives on all of the tools on Explore data page itself, which is really a source information, which tells you that we are using 5-year estimates for this breakdown by household type, gives you table number from American Community Survey, and also definitions. So anytime that you are unsure where the data is coming from, you have the source information underneath. And you can change the indicator and go back to Explore landing page here and pick another one. And then I will move on to the table format, what is really, not all of us like viewing data in a map format. So you can here see all the boroughs and all the community districts. You can also sort them alphabetically. You can also sort them by community district number, which actually groups them like within the borough. And also if you expand another race ethnicity, you have a table that populates all the information. And on a bar chart, I will just give a brief example. By default, you have New York City. I will add Queens, and I will add Brownsville. So you can view as many geographies as you would like on this page. And if we are here, like right now, we have the data for all children in poverty, but if I select specific race groups, they will be populated in a bar chart. So this functionality really allows us to compare communities to one another. You can also change the year and view the data for 2016. The next thing that is really important to keep in mind, you see these buttons over here. So if you feel like sharing the page, you can do it via Twitter, Facebook, or email. If you click on an email, you will be able to customize your comment and send the page to someone. You also have an option to print the page, which will print it in a PDF format. You have option to download the image, which makes it a PNG file. It usually takes a few seconds, so I might just exit out. Okay, it's right there. And for those of you who like working with data and using it for your own purposes, you can click raw data. You will be brought back to the landing page where you can select another indicator and create a zip file with CSV files for every breakdown you see on a page. So you have a file for total population and for any characteristics on the page. So I think I covered everything on Explore tab, and I will move on to our next tool, which is Rank Communities by Risk. So on this page, what you really see first in a top section are 6 domains. While on Explore data tab we had 8 domains, we, as Bijan mentioned, we used 18 indicators, 3 from each of the domains, to really track them from like on an annual basis, so we are able to compare communities to one another. So the first tab is really showing the overall risk, which means a risk that index created by combining all 18 indicators. On every other tab, we actually see the ranking for 3 indicators that make up that domain: economic security, housing, health, education, youth, and family and community. So I'll scroll down. So the map is by default populated by community districts, and it's showing the overall risk. You have a legend here. So in addition to ranking 59 communities from 1 to 59, with 1 being the highest risk and 59 being the lowest, we also group them in these 5 categories of lowest, moderate, low, moderate, high, highest risk. In the same way, this right rail is grouped, it's grouping the communities in the same fashion: highest risk, moderate, high, etc. So you can select community and view the risk by clicking on a map. We see that Unionport Soundview is ranking 10 out of 59, and the gradient is darker blue. We can also click on a community by doing this, like clicking on a right rail. And what is happening underneath the map, I'll come back to this section in a moment. We are populating the table, and table has all the communities that we selected with overall ranking and also the ranking for each of the domains. And the functionality above is really if we are trying to dive in and find more information about on a race ethnicity breakdown for a community of our interest, it's actually populating here. So we can compare community and search for the community here in this search box. So now on this table, you see the rankings within each domain. But if we select a specific domain, it's loading for a moment. Okay. Good job. Wow. It looks like, give me 1 second. And of course, every time we are doing a walkthrough, we have to have some hiccups, so it's inevitable. Okay. I don't know why the map is not populating. Huh.
It may be because we're sharing our screen.
It may be, but what I would like actually to show, to point to is that in this table now, since we are on an education risk domain, we actually can see the data for all of the indicators that are making up this, this domain. And if you're curious to find out more about particular indicator, you can always click here, and this will bring you back to the Explore page. It should bring you back to the Explore page. Yes, so you're back here on a math view for math test scores for third through 8th grades. I believe I covered everything, and please type up your questions so we can come back to whatever questions I didn't answer. Also here, I forgot to mention, you can switch and look at the risk for different years. We did it back to 2009. And I will move to our third tool, which is Map Community Resources, and we like to call it asset mapping. On this screen, you will see very similar design as on a risk ranking page with 6 domains. So the idea was that now we are able to overlay different assets over the risk ranking layers. So in the same way that the default layer is going to be overall, and then you can also view the domain, like housing domain. Hopefully the map populates soon. What is different here from the risk ranking page is that you can also, in addition to the domain index, you can also view particular indicators. So this is families with children in homeless shelters, and once that loads, we look at the different legends. But the main section of this whole tool is really this right rail, which has more than 30 assets. I will click on banks, and they will draw on a map. For some of the assets, we have a breakdown, like subcategories, like emergency food assistance, for example. We have SNAP centers, SNAP enrollment assistant locations, food pantries, soup kitchens. In a similar way, we have it for food. retail, and really this is always ever evolving tool, and we are open to other ideas, and we are brainstorming ideas continuously and adding new features and new assets on the site. So I will zoom in, I will click on big program sites, and I will zoom in 3 times, which is usually how much you need to actually get to the actual site on a page. And on a hover window, you can actually see the name of the site, different information, and that varies from one asset to another. In the same way that I mentioned for indicators on Explore tab, they're coming from different publicly available data sources. The same stands for assets. And I will bring you back at the end of the presentation to our About page to tell you where to find the sources for each of the assets. There might be something else. Yes. So if you, okay, give me 1 second. I will load the page again. So hopefully you won't have this black. So if we select a couple of communities and we scroll down beneath the map, you will see these scorecards. So basically for each of the communities that we selected, and 2 of them are selected by default, one with the lowest risk and one with the highest. And I have other few communities I just selected. We have a number of banks, like number of assets in that community district. And on a health side, I only selected big program sites. So if I add stores, I should get that information populated down in a scorecard. So this is really there to give you a brief snapshot of how many assets are in the community. Again, we are aware that people cross boundaries, that they access different services and have different feelings about different assets, different barriers, but this tool is really meant to be like advocacy tool. It's not a resource tool to really search for address or phone number for certain asset. It's more to have like that glance at where the resources are present and where they are missing. And in the same way as for the indicators, you can download the data on assets here. You can share it as well via email, Twitter, or Facebook. You can download the assets, and then you will have a latitude and longitude, which are geographical coordinates for each one, if you would like to use this data further. And you also have the community district that is associated with the assets, so you can monitor the data further. So I think we are getting closer to the time. It's 12:28. I will not do a dive deep on create location profiles. I'll just say that we will leave it for another time. I'll just say that you can use this page to select a district, and then you can select indicator of your interest or more indicators. And on this page, you can see the breakdowns. And then you're actually creating a profile, which is opening this page. So you can really customize the table and bring in more indicators and select what data types you would like. And before I wrap up, I will pull up the About Keeping Track page. So if you ever wonder how to get in touch with us, you can find this here. Here's Bijan's email. You can also view the tutorial we created 2 years ago. It is on our YouTube channel. You can also see how to cite our data based on like different tools like indicator data, risk ranking data, and asset mapping data. And you also can see sources for all of the assets that are listed on the assets tool. We are currently at the stage of redesigning this page. So it is more user friendly, but technically all the information is there. And Bijan, I will turn it over to you and to questions.
Sure. So just as a reminder, if you have any questions or thoughts that you want to share, please go to the bottom of the window where you're looking at this presentation, and there is an icon for Q&A, and there you can type in your questions. We already received one question, which was, when viewing assets on the map, can I see addresses or contact information for those assets? The short answer is no. However, there is other information that is available when you hover over a particular site. For example, when we look at early care and education sites, we have the capacity, the number of seats for children available at those sites. We do not include the address or contact information. As Maria said, it's not meant to be used as a directory, but more of a summation of the different resources that exist in a community to be able to identify whether there's a match or mismatch between the risks that families may experience and the supports in the areas that are there for them.
And I pulled up on the page one of the raw data files. I think this one has banks. So you can see that there is a community district name associated with each bank, their geographic coordinates, and it says bank. For different assets, this column will have, this column will have different information. So basically, whatever you see in a hover window will be in this one column. And then you can just do some data wrangling and separate text from columns to find information you need. Like in this case, you will see food retail as a main category and then traditional food retail underneath. Since these are stores, we didn't include any additional information, but for certain things like schools, we have information about school type, etc. Did this answer? And I think we should unmute.
Yeah, we can do that in a second. Okay. If you have any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat. So one thing I wanted to complement to what Maria was saying, which was the data sources that we have available on the site. If you go to the bottom of the Explore data page, or even any of the resources here, sometimes you will or will not find that information available on the websites that show that information. So for example, sometimes in the bottom of the source information, it'll say US Census Bureau, American Community Survey. But there are times when we, as a team, analyze data to produce it in a more legible way that is useful to users of our site. So depending on what indicator you're looking at, it may be represented in a table, say from the census, exactly as it is on their website. And sometimes it's also done with calculations that we do to make that information more accessible. For example, when we're giving population rates, trying to use the population in a particular community district to be able to say something that's comparable between different areas of the city. So we have another question. Within child welfare and mental health, do you outline specific indicators for ACEs, which for those of you wondering what ACEs is, it's adverse childhood experiences. So that's a very good question. In child welfare and mental health, there's ACEs also encompasses things like food insecurity, poverty, or different experiences of violence. Also types of discrimination. There are ACEs data available in specific surveys, for example, the Child Health Survey. The Child Health Survey, which has issues specific to this, but we do not identify them as a ACEs type question. But it's something that we will consider now that we know that there's an interest looking into that. And also there are, to some degree, different views of what should be included, especially when looking at adverse childhood experiences for different age groups of children. So younger children versus school-age children versus older children. This is something that we'll look into, and we appreciate the question. Any other questions or comments?
Also, did you all receive a message that we are trying to unmute you and open it for everyone?
Oh, that's a good point. Yes, so we just allowed for audio to be, your microphones to be used. So you may receive a pop-up on your computer saying, do you allow your microphone to be unmuted? You do not have to if you do not want to, but if you'd like to ask a question, just let us know. So one thing that we can do while people might be looking at questions, I just want to navigate to some specific indicators that we uploaded recently, which were specifically on the school diversity conversation that's been happening at DOE. For example, we recently had a blog on CCC's main site highlighting this information. And if you go to our education section, we're constantly looking at new indicators to put up because of conversations that are happening of the time or that we're anticipating based on our policy advocacy. So recently we added statistics on the student racial ethnic diversity in Department of Education schools, as well as the student economic status. This is looking at the percentage of students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. We know that everyone in New York City schools are eligible to receive lunch, but this is an indicator that, or free lunch, that this is an indicator that says more about the economic status of students. And then related to this is the Student Economic Need Index, which looks at, by school district, several values in terms of whether a student is eligible for public assistance, whether they live in temporary housing, or whether their home language is something other than English. If they fit one of these criteria, or also facing some other kind of student or other kind of hardship, they get a value of 1. And so the map is showing the average Student Economic Need Index for schools according to this school district. So here we see that in New York City, the average economic need index for schools is 0.7. This means that about 70% of students in DOE schools are in this category of having economic need. Other questions, let us know, and we can, in the chat, or raise your hand, or I should say, just send us a message in the chat. In the meantime, I just want to, oh, here we go. Is there a way within economic conditions to create a filter that could examine disparities in wealth by district? This is a great question, one that we have as well. So let's just go to the economic conditions tab to look at what we have there. In this section, we have poverty, several indicators in terms of poverty overall, or in terms of the individuals in New York City who experience poverty. And poverty here is measured by the federal poverty line, which may apply more or less to New York City, because we know that the cost of living in New York City is higher. Nevertheless, this is the number that we report. Child poverty, issues like income in terms of household income, family income, median income, labor force statistics, we report several of them, and then income support. So in terms of looking at disparities in wealth, I mean, one of the things that we can do is, for example, looking at median income and seeing how in some areas of the city, the average or the median income in an area is as high as $250,000 for households with families with children, is specifically the one that's highlighted here, or as low as $23,000. In terms of looking specifically at the disparities, there are other indicators that we're considering adding and we're working on in terms of the Gini coefficient, or also an income ratio, looking at the percentiles of the highest or lowest income earners and seeing what share of those community districts or parts of the city are kind of having large disparities. one of the things that we learn in doing our community-based assessment is, for example, if you look at the North Shore, what's labeled here as St. George in Staten Island, the median household income is $62,870. But when you actually look at the neighborhoods within this area, there's actually a large disparity whereby there's no other community district in the city where a high share of the population, there's such a high share of high income earners and a high share of low income earners with few people in the middle. So if you look at our community-based assessment on the North Shore of Staten Island, we go into depth about that specific issue.
And I will also bring up that in the same way that we have different characteristics like race or age groups for different indicators, we do have intention to bring in economic, like either poverty level or income disparities as a characteristics for different indicators.
So we have two more questions, one about data and one about the webinar. So the question, do you have data on SNAP and WIC enrollment, and how often is it updated? I'll let Maria handle this.
Yes, we do have data on SNAP enrollment. I'll pull this indicator here, and it's coming actually from the New York City Human Resources Administration. They have district resource statement documents, which they publish every year. And we get information for SNAP enrollment for every community district from there. There are different indicators also in American Community Survey that touch on SNAP enrollment, but this is definitely showing actual number of enrollments is more reliable source for the data. In terms of big data, on that note, the answer is more complicated. Give me 1 second. That is actually one of the indicators that we do report in our community-based assessments. And for several years, the most recently available data was 2014, and it was giving us a data by the zip code. That was one of the reasons that prompted us to really have a zip code as a geography on keeping track online, so we can show this data in a meaningful way, as we cannot really aggregate zip code level data to community districts, since the boundaries don't really overlap and they're really not meant to be comparable. But we are working and we are constantly in touch with the New York State Department of Health regarding the big data. So we are hoping to have some news on that indicator soon.
Thanks for that question. We have another. Will we have access to the recording of this webinar for reference after it's completed? Yes, so we are planning on sending a follow-up message about the event, and you'll have an access to that. And then also, if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us after the webinar. We'd be happy to answer those questions that may come up after we complete today.
I would also say, in addition to questions about the data or indicators and tools, feel free also to reach out to us with any questions about functionalities on the site. We really try to get as much of insight on users' experience and feedback. And you might have seen that we have a little pop-up survey in a corner. So we had a different question a few months ago. Now we are asking users just to tell us how they're using Keeping Track Online today, or any day they're using it. So feel free to be in touch with us in that way as well.
I wanted to go back to a question asked earlier in the chat, which was around, is there a way to look at disparities in wealth by the district? And in addition to what I shared earlier, which is looking at indicators specifically meant to look at economic inequities, we do have indicators that try to take into account how do income conditions maybe affect access to different services or just outcomes for families. So a good example of this is the household internet access indicator, where you can filter the data by households with internet by income. So households that have less than $20,000 household income, between 20,000 and 75,000, or above 75,000. And what you see is that this changes the representation of the data in meaningful ways. For example, in some areas of the city, for households that have less than $20,000 in a year, half of them, or more than half of them, don't have access to internet. It's even higher in the Lower East Side, nearly 70%. So when we're thinking about, for example, in the upcoming 2020 decennial census, where more households than ever before are going to be accessing, or one of the main modes of completing a census is going to be via the internet, using our data resources to identify areas of the city that might inform how organizations do outreach to areas of the city that might need more or less support to access their census forms online. So we have another question. Can you speak about how the tools and the work can support advocacy efforts that CCC is tackling? So I guess that was typed just as I was talking a little bit about that. But also I think that there's several different ways that this happens. I mean, it's always nice when we're walking around the office to see our colleagues on the policy and advocacy team navigating our database to answer questions that they or our partners and coalitions have. One of the examples of data that's really been fueling the conversations for advocacy is around our the conversations around early education system in New York City. As you may know, CCC had an important contribution in ensuring that teachers in the early education system that are part of community-based organizations are paid in line with their counterparts in Department of Education settings. And so the data analysis that Maria actually did, we included those data onto our online database to inform the public at large, but then also our coalition partners who were looking for this information. And the enrollment data here is important, especially because as part of the push for having salary parity was the recognition that 60% of children in the early education system in New York City are in community-based organizations. So meaning that 60% of those students are taught by teachers in the community-based organization setting. So these data really helped with that advocacy effort specifically. But then again, one of the things that we continue to do as part of an advocacy effort is to say, what data should exist, or what data may exist, but is not made available publicly at a regular interval. And so some of our efforts is also not just to say what data, or what can the data tell us, but what data do we need to help with advocacy. And one of the areas that we're hoping to do more of this is in terms of understanding how well children are prepared to enter a school setting. So for the young child space, trying to understand what percentage of children might need to have different types of supports, whether it be for learning or physical health, to get them school ready. Another aspect is in terms of addressing the issue of homelessness, and specifically family homelessness. There's a great data out there, but more can be had to be able to look at the issue from multiple angles. And so part of our advocacy work is saying, what are the data gaps, and how can we as an organization work with our partners to try to get this information available in the future. Any other questions? We'd be happy to answer. I do think, though, that we're wrapping up. But at any point after the event today, you should feel free to send us a message. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be having a follow-up email with all of you. And we encourage you to use the site. And if you encounter any questions in terms of if you can't find something, or if you just want some help thinking through a particular question that you have, we'd be very happy to talk with you over the phone as well. Just please feel free to see us as a resource. So we have another question about what would it take for CCC to be able to integrate program quality measures for early care and education? This is a great question, and I totally understand. I think, Jared, knowing some of your background from conversations in the past, why you might be asking this. This is something that's on our radar, and I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is what information might we add to the community asset map that can say something about specific site locations. And so this is something that we're going to be exploring specifically for the program quality. But then also we have a desire to aggregate that site information into indicators that we can look at trends across geographies of the city. And so we do have information on teacher certification and experience in the education section of our indicators page.
And I would say that this is always like a call, like if you are familiar with the data source that we haven't explored on keeping track online or that we haven't used, feel free to start that conversation. In the same way that we are using and like our advocacy efforts are fueling our sites, we are really oftentimes growing certain parts of the site based on our partners' interests. So that is another avenue, and it's meant to be a resource for organizations to push for their own agenda.
So with that, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. Again, please do feel free to reach out to us with any questions, thoughts, feedback, requests. We're happy to answer them and to continue this conversation. We want this to be a resource that is continually improved to address the needs of users. And one thing that I will leave you with is that please expect, in the same way that you received the information about this webinar, there are other webinars that will be happening over the course of the months coming up. The next one will be on September 23rd, where, as I mentioned, our colleagues Carlos Rosales and Sofia Halkidas will talk about our census advocacy efforts and specifically the undercount of young children in the decennial census. And something else is that in the coming weeks, we'll be launching new features on this online database. So some of what you see today will look slightly different in the future. So if you see a message inviting you to another webinar on CCC's data resources, that may not be the same. It might have some more information about new features that we will deploy in October. So please keep an eye out for those. And with any thoughts or questions, we look forward to speaking with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.